give yourself permission and make room in your life to think about those bigger things that you really do want for yourself. I would encourage everyone, think bigger than you are. Like I'm just talking about daydreaming. There's no limits. You don't have to share those thoughts with anyone, but create that room for you to say, what else?
For decades, self-care was often seen as being at odds with ambition. But the times are changing, and they continue to change in the legal profession. On this episode of Dear Beth, from the personal to the professional to system-wide change, we are looking at the connections between personal wellness and the larger justice system. I'm Jen Cannell, and this is Dear Beth, a Women in Law podcast. Joining us once again in the studio, Bree Lowenberger. She's one of the co-editors of the collection of personal letters that we base this whole podcast on, Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law. Hey there, Bree.
Hi, Jen.
And also joining us today, a woman who's spent her career raising awareness about mental health and personal wellness within the legal profession. Justice Michele Hollins was in private practice for 25 years before her appointment 7 years ago to King's Bench in Alberta. Now, today, she is enjoying watching her twin daughters live out their amazing lives, and she delights in her grandchildren. And she is joining us today from Medicine Hat. Welcome to Dear Beth, Justice Hollins.
Thank you so much.
So why are you in Medicine Hat right now?
The King's Bench judges cover not just the Edmonton and Calgary centres, but a number of other smaller centres, Red Deer, Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, Peace River, you name it. So many of us spend weeks here and there on the road.
Well, in looking back about what brought you to the point you're at as a judge, what was it that originally sparked that interest in mental health and in wellness in the legal profession? Like, where does your passion for this kind of come from?
So it was definitely homegrown. It came out of an experience that I had many years ago now, more than 15 years ago, with a very deep depression, a clinical depression that I suffered in approximately 2005, I think, which basically left me completely dysfunctional for quite a period of time. And it was an awful experience, but one that I certainly never expected to have. I would think that most people would describe me as a fairly engaged and quite happy person generally. And so in the fall of 2005, when I began to just be sad, and it was a very pervasive, overwhelming feeling of sadness. There was just no reason for it whatsoever. And yet every morning I woke up and it got worse and it got worse and it got worse. And, like any good problem solver, I set about trying to figure out what on earth could be making me so sad. And there really wasn't anything. I was a partner at the firm of Dunphy Best Bloxham at the time. I loved it, loved my partners. I had a really good client base and a lot of interesting work. Everything was really good professionally, and I'd worked really hard to get to that point. And my kids were doing great. Those twin daughters were finishing high school and looking into their university programs and where they were going to go. It just, everything about my life outwardly was perfect. And so that just led then to me berating myself for how I was feeling, that sort of phase of things where really just self-recrimination and trying to basically chastise myself out of my depression. And of course that didn't work. And it got to the point where I was really struggling to go to work. I would wake up and not be able to get out of bed. And if I could get out of bed, I would shower and then I'd have to go back to bed. There were days I dragged myself into work in the middle of the day, and just getting there was just an unbelievable feat. And, then I would lay down on the floor of my office and cry for hours. Just no idea what was happening to me. I was completely lost.
Did anybody come and talk to you or try to intervene?
So, yes, thankfully, eventually, a couple of people did. And they were lawyers, actually. And so, this is one of the reasons that I know that lawyers can help each other because they helped me. And so, a couple of friends of mine within the profession did intervene and say, look, we are concerned that things are not good. I just didn't want to be. I didn't want to be. Um, so I did, as a result of those people coming to me, I went to a counselor and I walked in and I think I told her my name and then I cried for an hour. And she said, okay, we might need to deal with the physiological imbalances here before we can talk about coping mechanisms and psychologically what's happening. And so I began a course of antidepressants, which I took for almost 2 years, but did allow me to even out the edges enough to take advantage of the counseling and to sort of get to the bottom of things. As it turned out, the bottom of things was not that deep. It just was indiscernible to me. I mentioned that this was that my daughters were in grade 12 at the time. Well, they were leaving.
Oh,
I can still hardly talk about it 20 years later.
but that's when we would have seen them do the last time they're going to go to whatever team or club tryouts.
As soon as that was mentioned to me, I knew exactly that that's what it was. I mean, it had been just the three of us for 16 years. And they were both leaving at the same time. So it just was incomprehensible to me that I had any sort of life that was going to exist beyond that. Like I mean, it sounds really melodramatic. And believe me, I berated myself for that too. Because of course you raise kids to go out there and take over the world. That's what you want. And so I was excited for them, but I was panicked for myself, like just desperate for it not to happen, even though I knew it was going to happen and it needed to happen. So that was my experience. And it took me, the better part of a couple of years to get back completely on track. And so I've talked about it because I lost a lot of time and things got a lot worse than they needed to be. If I had been prepared to say, hey, this is something serious, and you need to try to talk to someone who may have some background experience in this, I do think that it would have been a bit different experience for me. So yeah, I then sort of resolved to use whatever platform I had available through then the Canadian Bar Association, both at the branch level and then at the national level, to talk about that experience and to encourage legal professionals to look out for themselves and look out for each other. And, that has morphed into talking about mental health and wellness within the workplace. It's been a while now since I've practiced law, but I still have, well, one of my daughters actually is in big law. So I still have some view, I guess, into that world. And of course, judges are hardly immune from mental health issues that arise in our work. And so I'm now, trying to do some work within the judiciary as well.
Justice Hollins, thank you for that. And I wanted to take us back to the earlier years in your career. What were some of the coping mechanisms and strategies that you relied on in starting practice?
My daughters were 14 months when I started law school. They were pretty little. That actually probably wasn't as hard as leaving law school and articling and getting into practice. But it was really when I started at a big firm, and the girls would have been 5 or 6 at that time. And that was hard. I would say those years between kind of 5 and 9, when they were ages 5 and 9, because I was just beginning. And so articling and those first few years of trying to establish some credibility and some job security and just trying to keep up with the expectations, it was a bit of a slog.
I'm going to jump in here because you did this as a single mom, right?
Yeah.
So you've got these two girls, they're like starting kindergarten. Here you are, new province, like you've got so much going on. How did you have to set up your life to make everything work as basically the one person that these two girls could count on, and for yourself?
Yeah. Well, I don't dwell on it too much because I'm not sure. I remember often saying to people, I mean, you can't send them back. They're your responsibility. So you just kind of do what you have to do. At that time, this is 30 years ago, there was an active discouragement in the profession about talking about, having kids, certainly being a single mom. I mean, I was discouraged from talking about that in interviews and even within the office, I mean, I don't think there were any women in relationships that had young children at that time. So it was a bit of a separation that always struck me as this kind of false setup, right? That I would go to work and I was just like everyone else and then go home, and pick these kids up. So what did it look like? Well, it looked like me, speeding up to the daycare every day at 6 o'clock because they fined you $10 a minute if you were late. So there was a lot of having to make excuses or, I have to leave now. Realistically, it meant working in the evenings. So when the kids went to bed, and, I can tell you my daughter is still doing the same sort of thing. So you put the kids to bed, you pull out your laptop and you do some more work. But I will say, in terms of coping mechanisms, I look at it maybe a little differently now with my daughter, as I said, sort of in the same position. So she just went back after her second mat leave. And we had a conversation at Christmas where she was expressing what I know to be a very common feeling of guilt. You go back to work and you're at work and you're thinking about work, but at the same time, you're thinking about your kids and you're worried that, I'm going to be late getting home tonight. I spend time now telling young mothers, ditch the guilt. It is completely unproductive. And I know that it's very difficult to sort things into now I'm working and I need to focus on work, and now I'm being a mom and I need to focus on being a mom. But the more disciplined you can be about doing that, the better off you'll be, because that feeling of I'm never enough, I'm never doing enough in either sphere of either parenthood or work, the reality is you only feel that way because you're trying to do both at one time. And, you're actually overdoing it, not underdoing it. So I also said to my daughter, this was a bit of an epiphany for me, that I never felt guilty. I never felt guilty about working at all. And I said, I think it was because I always conceived of it as something I was doing for them. That, I was lucky to have a good job and I needed to keep that job. So I needed to do a really good job of my job in order to pay the rent and in order to buy them groceries and clothes. And so I always conceived of that as not, something I enjoyed it. Absolutely. And I got a lot out of it personally, but I never felt guilty because that was something that I had to do. I had to work at something. So anyway, I may be a bit of an anomaly, but I'm encouraging my own daughter to think about it the same way.
Don't let the guilt get to you. Just discard it. And it's funny as I listen to you because you not only managed this, you not only juggled them and exceeded expectations at your job. When you also wrote about never really having the time to dream big, that suddenly jumped up and hit me. What did you mean by that?
So just very basically, I guess, give yourself permission and make room in your life to think about those bigger things that you really do want for yourself. I mean, you might be going to work every day because you have to pay rent and buy groceries. Life is shorter and longer than you think. It is both those things. And so to the extent that it's longer than you think, I would encourage everyone, think bigger than you are. Like I'm just talking about daydreaming. There's no limits. You don't have to share those thoughts with anyone, but create that room for you to say, what else? What else, if I could do anything, what else would I want to do? What would I want to accomplish? The quote that is, I looked it up again today before we started. It's attributed to Bill Gates. I didn't do any fact checking on that. That most of us, but it just struck me as so true, most of us overestimate what we can do in a year, right? Oh, this year I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But we underestimate what we can do in a long time frame. And time keeps marching, right? It's not waiting for you to have time to think about, oh, what would be the pinnacle to me of what I might accomplish professionally or personally? If I wasn't doing this, what kind of a career might I like? When this career is over, I don't know, what might I do? I mean, those are the kinds of things, and there's different points at your life where that becomes important. But here, I was talking to my younger self because my younger self was very busy. And so my younger self did not sort of set aside that time or try to employ the discipline to think about, what do I want in 10 years? What do I want in 20 years? And I think for women particularly, we tend to underestimate what we can accomplish. And I know this is a generalization, but I've seen it. I've seen it over and over and over again. Women are, prone to diminish their skills and their accomplishments. When there's a job description, women are the ones that are like, oh, well, I only check 4 of those 5 boxes. So, I better not apply for this because I'll never get it. And this is not me, but I heard this at a conference I was at many years ago, a woman who was talking about women applicants to board positions and said, men will read the same advertisement. And if they have 1 out of the 5, they think they're eminently qualified. So I'm kind of, I guess, speaking to that, don't underestimate yourself. And this isn't the same as a to-do list. This isn't the same as I want to become a non-equity partner. I'm talking about, like, I think the one that I managed to disclose, I haven't disclosed all of them because some of them you don't want to share. Like, they really are outrageous. But I've always had a dream to throw out the first pitch at an MLB game. I have no idea why, but I really, really want to do that. It's not going to happen. That's fine. That's why we call them dreams. That's why we don't call them goals. We don't call them objectives. They are dreams. But if you can see it, then you might be able to do it. Now, I'm not talking about, because, I can just hear all of the, well, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I'm not saying if you can't sing, you're not going to win American Idol by sheer force of will, right? That's not going to happen. But we all know the milieu in which we are working and in which we live. We know what our interests are. And if you're honest with yourself, you know what your talents and your skills are. So think bigger about those, because a lot of the really giant accomplishments take time, and having those ideas in your mind, I think, allows you to see opportunities that you might not otherwise see. That, hey, you know what? I've always wanted to throw out a pitch at an MLB game. Maybe I'll start with the Okotoks Dogs. It's about allowing yourself to imagine what could be.
Well, and you point out in your chapter that we sometimes miss the opportunity to identify a different or additional direction towards something else that might bring greater happiness and fulfillment in our lives. But my question for you is, how do we discover what that direction might be?
Well, I mean, I am singularly unqualified to speak about that because I've had basically one direction. And so I haven't made, sort of really significant unforeseen career changes. I will say this, that as I sort of look at what I'm doing now and I begin to envision the end of that, I feel a bit of that same panic that I felt when my kids left home, because I'm not sure what that's going to look like. And by the way, I have a therapist that I meet with regularly, and she and I are talking about this a lot because she's encouraging me to do exactly what I've been encouraging everyone else in this article to do, which is start imagining yourself in completely different scenarios. So, what are your interests? What do you know your recognized talents are. And I mean, you can take that down to sort of, I guess, the granular level. We know there's lots of organizations and counselors, career counselors, that will take those kinds of things and brainstorm with you. You don't have to go to a professional. You can have those conversations with your partner. You can have those conversations with family members or with friends or with yourself. I mean, I spend an awful lot of time talking to myself. But the idea is that if you say, I've always wanted to I enjoy public speaking. I mean, that's a truth for me, but that's not a part of my job right now. So, what opportunities might present themselves in areas that I'm interested in, and I think I have something to offer? I mean, that's just a small example, but if I was busy saying, oh, well, I don't practice anymore, so I really shouldn't be speaking to lawyers who are practicing because their experience is different than mine. I mean, it's about, people will tell you when you can't do something. Don't worry about, don't worry about putting your own brakes on. That's something I tried to hand down to my kids. I know my parents certainly tried to give that to me. Yeah. Dream big. Go out and do something. Go out and do something you want to do.
Well, and giving yourself the space to even dream about that. It seems like from the dark days that you sort of described in 2005 when the depression set in and the blackness set in, that sounds like it was such a turning point for you in terms of mental health. And you said that, I mean, back in the olden days, all these things that we kind of call self-care measures now, that just inconsistent with being a true professional. You're not working hard enough. Like, surely you can just power your way through this. Yeah. How much would you say we've actually moved away from that mindset in the legal profession?
Well, I mean, I would say significant. It's not that there's no stigma around mental health issues. There absolutely is, or there wouldn't be a reason to continue to try to talk about it publicly. And there still is lots of that going on. Certainly within the judiciary, I can tell you, there's enormous pressure to always be in control and to not, I guess, show those kinds of. I struggle with the wording here because I know that, other people might say cracks or weaknesses or whatever. And I actually think it's being human. It's the human condition. And I don't have a lot of room for the idea that judges are not human or should be presenting themselves as something other than. But there's that tension, right, in my profession. And so there's still lots of work to do. But what I've seen, I think, at least in the last 5 to 10 years, is we kind of accept that work can be stressful, and we accept that mental health should not be stigmatized in the way that it historically was, and that there's power in being able to share those stories and talk about it and to try to help each other be healthier. But the rubber hits the road when you talk about what are employers going to do about that. So whether those are institutions or corporations or law firms or whatever they are, lawyers particularly, because lawyers still sell their time for money. And if there was ever a recipe for mental health issues arising from burnout, stress, and depression, it has to be that, because the demands on your time are the job description. That's literally what you do. And so I think that reimagining how legal services are delivered, how law firms are structured, all of those things are really big, big, big topics that are beyond the purview of, one person telling her story about depression. But that's where I see the conversation is increasingly going. The report that we got that was commissioned jointly by the CBA and the Federation of Law Societies that came out last year, I think in October, and it was just a phase 1 report, but had 10 recommendations, I believe. And so I know that lots of institutions and lots of organizations are busy working with those to see what they may be able to accomplish. But the question that you asked about self-care being inconsistent with ambition, the reality is, not only is it not consistent, it's a non-negotiable requirement. They are inextricably linked, because to be To be wildly successful at anything takes commitment of time and it takes longevity. Right? So if you're going to be happy and successful in law, you're going to need to do it for a while. And to do it for a while, you're going to need to be healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Some people would say financially, the big four or the big five, depending on how you think about that. So I see self-care as your investment in your own accomplishments, not as something that you need to be doing on the side. And of course, there's balance, right? You don't get to put your hand up in the middle of a trial and say that you have a yoga class, so we should adjourn the trial. But it's also important to remember it's no one else's job to take care of you. It's your job to take care of you. And I mean that not just physically, I mean that emotionally and mentally as well.
Bree, I know that you actually have a perspective you wanted to bring into this, just in terms of making the legal profession a healthier place. Who are you talking with about this?
That's right, Jen. This is Brianna Needham. She's a commercial litigation lawyer and contributor to our book, working in Toronto. We asked Brianna what she believes the next frontier will be when it comes to improving equity, diversity, and belonging in the legal profession. So it's a healthy legal profession that better represents the public it serves. Have a listen.
For me, though, I think where I see the next steps being taken at law firms, legal employers, and in the profession more broadly is working on addressing the whole myth of the meritocracy. What I mean by that is that it's still quite common, I think, at law firms and legal employers to hear people say, well, it's a meritocracy here. We recruit on meritocracy, we advance on meritocracy, we promote on meritocracy. Regrettably, the reality is that while meritocracy is a very highly valued social ideal, it's not how systems or institutions actually operate day to day. Of course, people want to believe that it's a meritocracy, that it's fair, because the concept of a meritocracy is a really highly valued social idea. It's very important to people to believe that the institutions we work in and contribute to are ones where our success and the success of those around us arises, purely from evaluating skill and effort. But the reality is that the whole it's a meritocracy concept is more fiction than fact. In the past 5 or so years, there's been a lot of talk about the importance of equity, diversity, inclusion initiatives, discussions about programming, training, that kind of thing. But we're not seeing a lot of implementation, a lot of results. One great, I think, example of this is very obvious is a lot of large law firms have a goal of 30% women in our equity partnership. Well, and I didn't come up with this phrase myself, a goal of 30% women is a commitment to at least 70% men. And some firms still, despite setting these goals 5-7 years ago, still aren't meeting them. So there is a disconnect between talking the talk and actually walking the walk that needs to be addressed, because continuing to just talk is not going to move the dial. It's my great hope that as time goes on and in the future, and for everybody who is joining the profession, that we see kind of this move away from the myth of the meritocracy by both implementing real concrete measures to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion, and by addressing the importance of intersectionality.
That's Brianna Needham, a commercial litigation lawyer in Toronto. So, Justice Hollins, Bree, thoughts on what she's saying?
I'm a data metrics person. So when I hear the stat of a goal of 30% women is a commitment to 70% men, my mind goes to, how do we define meritocracy? What is success? How is success being measured? What conscious or subconscious biases factor into such measurement? What defines a good lawyer? Who defines a good lawyer?
Justice Hollins?
Absolutely. That clip from Brianna is implanted in my head in a space where it has lived for a long time. Gender parity is, it's just crazy to me, as Brianna said, that we would treat 30% of anything as being, equal. It's not equal. That you're just bad at math if you think that's okay. I remember having this conversation years ago, which is what got me so fired up about it at the time. This was a friend of mine in the oil and gas industry. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That just happened to be where he worked. And we were talking about women on boards. And there was an organization out of the UK called Catalyst. And it had as its objective to get women on for-profit boards. So these are paid directorships of 30% on average. And I was complaining to him that, I thought that was kind of like, why would you say that? And he said, well, it's going to happen. You just need to be patient.
How patient are we feeling?
Yeah,
about this? Come on.
He at least regretted saying it that way, I'm quite sure. So it might be different if we were just now graduating equal amounts of men and women into the profession. We were 54% women in my class that started in 1989. So you've got 30 years of women floating around to pick from. So don't tell me that you don't have enough qualified women to do these jobs. You absolutely do. And so, this is where I guess the subjects tend to bleed together, is what's not happened is that the profession has clung to its inhospitality to women. We've got lots of women that are qualified, but they often leave active practice because it's made virtually impossible, or at least much more difficult, for them to make the same progress. And, who could fault someone for being discouraged when those kind of institutional, systematic failure, I guess, to recognize what women bring and what they may need to be able to produce for your firm just seems to, to continue. I know there's progress. I get it. But I'm constantly reminded of the preface to the American Bar Association. Again, this is 20 years ago, did a big study on women in the legal profession in the U.S. And the preface to the whole report, it was giant, Surlock's report, said, after years of imperceptible progress, we've made imperceptible progress. And, sometimes it feels like that.
Mm-hmm. So, Justice Hollins, I look at all this from an access to justice and, continuous improvement lens. And so I'm curious for our listeners, how does a healthy workplace have an impact on the larger justice system?
So I think that is an excellent question with a very easy answer. Sort of, because the parts are so intricately connected, right? People come to lawyers because they have their own problems, and they need those lawyers to be positioned and capable of dealing with those problems. And so if you have a practicing bar that is not healthy, any law society will tell you this, those are lawyers that are not going to be able to meet that need. And so the fewer of those that we have, the worse off the public is that we serve. And even worse, if you think about the idea that lawyers who still, either because of financial pressure or personal pressure or reputational pressure, don't want to take a step back to deal with a mental health crisis. When I was in the throes of my depression, I was very low functioning. There was not a lot of work that I could do, that I could actually sit down and focus on and do from beginning to end. I was very lucky because I was a partner. I had a lot of goodwill in that firm, and I had partners that were really, really supportive. That is not the case most often for more junior lawyers, for articling students. And frankly, it's that demographic that is at much higher risk of mental health issues arising. If you as a firm have lawyers who can't do their job, it just seems to me that that's just so obvious. So it affects access to justice because you want lawyers that are able to actually help people. You don't want lawyers who get partway through something and then can't finish it because of their own issues. You want lawyers who are well enough trained in issues of mental health to recognize those issues in their own clients and to work around those or work with those when they present themselves. It was years after I had finished this file, and it was a big, big file, that one of the principals of this large company, a person that I had become quite good friends with, expressed to me that they had had a mental health crisis, not terribly unlike my own, when they were trying to deal with me as their lawyer. And it wasn't something that I recognized. And if if that person had felt secure enough to be able to talk to me about it, there's a bunch of things that we could have done in the course of that litigation, which was pretty demanding litigation, to have made that easier on that person. That conversation doesn't just have to be between lawyers. It could eventually, conceivably, involve the clients as well. And then, of course, we go to judges. So when you talk about the whole legal system, I'm now, trying to sort of work at it the other way, because that is also an access to justice issue. We're already short judges. Every jurisdiction in the country is. And that's not helped by a job that, frankly, drives some of judges out, at least from full-time work, and leaves us with no replacement. That makes it harder for us as a bench to deliver the services that we are trying to deliver. But it's, again, to the extent that it's occasioned by the way that this job is set up and the way that pressure is put on judges to deliver at all costs and to do more with less. And the trickle-down effect to the public is obvious. What may be less obvious is, judges who are kind of at their wits' end. They're tired, they're under-resourced, they're under-supported, and they go into a courtroom and they are impatient and short with counsel. Well, now guess what? Now you've passed on your mental health issue to the lawyers, who may be devastated at being spoken to that way, or being, if they feel that they were embarrassed in open court. I mean, it's just, it is all connected.
Well, in terms of humans who are doing good, lawyers who are doing so well, I want to just bring you a little bit of tape from one of the most capable women I know. And this is a perspective on wellness and that space for dreaming big. This is Ashila Naidu. She's a lawyer. She's the owner of Naidu Legal here in Saskatoon.
Wellness means a lot of different things to different people. What wellness means to me is having some form of work-life balance. Law firms, not just lawyers, but office staff are often working long hours too in order to complete work. And that's similar in all office environments, I think, to a certain extent. Being mindful of mental health, doing things that make a person feel good in order to have a little bit of time to oneself, and making sure just to carry on with regular routines. So for myself, wellness is, taking time to make sure that I'm fully present with my family, with my husband and my children and other family members, and also to do things like ensuring that I'm leading a healthy enough lifestyle. I enjoy to run, I enjoy to go on the Peloton, and trying to sometimes create new systems to make that work for me. Although Naidu Legal is a female law firm, it's all females who work with Naidu Legal at this time. We are a diverse and very welcoming work environment. The women who I practice with are all from different ages, from all different backgrounds, different experience levels, different life experience, and also from different parts of the world. I've really wanted to foster an inclusive work environment for the people who are here and where they feel well supported as well. And I think that inclusivity is really important in any work environment, but especially in legal practice, because we see a lot of women dwindling out of practice, and that includes, support staff as well because of parenting responsibilities. So I think it's important to be in a work environment where our values are aligned and that, everybody knows that our commitments to family as well as children in some cases as well is supported.
And once again, that is Ashla Naidu. She's a lawyer, an entrepreneur, the owner of Naidu Legal. And I will vouch for her. She really does go for runs and gets on the Peloton. When she comes up to Candle Lake, she's like, Jen, are we going for a run? And it's like, yes, we are. Absolutely, we are. I never say no. But just hearing the way she sees that in terms of work and what she brings to the practice that she owns, what goes through your mind listening to her, Justice Hollins?
Well, it sounds wonderful. That kind of a work environment that would encourage you to figure out, and, it may not be running or Peloton, it might be something, but whatever it is, right? All of us have something that recharges us a bit, something that we know makes us feel better. And an environment that allows you to make some room for that is, I think, has a lot of foresight. Let me put it that way. I think that's the way to go. It also reminds me, to say this is something I do say when I talk about mental health. So it's an analogy. If the first person that you want to talk to about a mental health issue isn't as supportive as you need someone to be, then go talk to someone else. And it's sort of the same for, the work environment that you are looking to work in. If you are in a place and it's not conducive to that and it is harmful to then try something else. Knock on another door. And if that one doesn't work, knock on another door. And eventually you'll find a firm like that. Now, again, as long as we're selling our time for money, the trade-off is pretty obvious. But I do think that the more diverse environments that we have to choose from, the more people will be happy to stay in the profession and feel really fulfilled.
Absolutely. Building off of what Justice Hollins had to say, to actually take you back to the last line of our book that asks lawyers and readers in general, how will you build an entirely new table altogether? And Ashla Naidu has not created a seat at the table. She created and is creating her own table. And that takes an immense amount of courage. So I'm just so inspired by what she's doing and that she's going for it.
Well, that is what I wanted to talk with you about today. I just want to thank you so much for your insight and for being so open with us, Justice Hollins. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm quite honored.
That's Justice Michele Hollins. She was in private practice for 25 years before her appointment about 7 years ago to King's Bench in Alberta. Now she's based in Calgary. We reached her today in Medicine Hat. And Bree, thank you so much again for being our co-pilot on the podcast today.
Thanks, Jen.
Well, it's that time again. We have brought back the lovely Beth Bilson for the Studio Letters segment. And Beth, of course, is one of our co-editors of Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law. Hello there, Beth.
Hello.
Well, and I'm going to remind our listeners, if they have a question for Beth, they can drop a line to Create Justice. That's all one word, createjustice@usask.ca. And on this whole topic of wellness, I see you've brought a special guest in today, Beth.
I have. Today, I'm very pleased to say that we have Judy Johnson-Sfernock, who I first met when she was a PhD student and sessional lecturer in the College of Education. But she currently has a very exciting and unique role as the well-being coordinator of the College of Law here at the University of Saskatchewan.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Judy.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here, Judy. And I think I'm kind of going, okay, a well-being coordinator. What do you do in that job? Like, what would a typical day look like?
Very diverse. I've only been in the role for about 7 or 8 months, and the role was kind of devised with a variety of needs at hand. But I found that over the last few months, I've kind of spent most of my time counseling and supporting students. So whether it's, in crisis in the college or just in need of support or needing to bridge them to community or campus supports, maybe they need something more diverse than what I can offer. I bridge that support and just provide a level of comfort, just, I guess, knowing that there's a counselor in the building. I also do some consulting with staff and faculty. And a big part of that, I think, is just reassuring gut feelings. They might come to me with an issue or a concern, and I just validate what they're thinking, and maybe sometimes support a conversation between them and another student if there's something difficult happening. But I also do some co-teaching, so bringing in well-being to conversations around ethics or criminal law or just different elements of the law that might be triggering for people or cause confusion or concern. I've done a little bit of that. And then advocacy work. So that just involves research, presence in the building, just holding space for talking about mental health, bringing awareness to that, which inherent in that is just destigmatizing the whole conversation. So we're going to talk about it, and it's normal, and it's okay, and it's who and what we are. So yeah, that's a big part of the work. I would say it's 80% hopefully in prevention mode, trying to get ahead of some of those needs and concerns, and then intervention for students when they need it.
What do we know, Judy, about the needs of law students and even faculty and staff when it comes to well-being issues?
Yeah, so there's the things we see that bubble to the surface that would present as anxiety, stress, pressure, low self-worth. I see some of that, and maybe even some, at worst case, depression or withdrawal. And these are all like symptoms. And so the needs that are underlying that would certainly be an understanding of the importance and power of self-care. And we all talk about self-care. I just wrote an article for the law school and I titled it Self-Care, Self-Schmear. And really just, I think what's needed there is just an understanding of, the power of self-care and what it does. It supports and protects the nervous system. So I try to embed that in all of the conversations and teaching that I have there. And then training in the application of self-compassion. And I think that's what we can use to combat the competitive nature or the pressure of something new that we're taking on, just applying that self-compassion, which is self-kindness, lowering the bar around perfectionism, room for mistakes, things like that. And then there's a need for spaces to be vulnerable. And I think there is a need for a private space to be vulnerable, like my office, where you can just sit and have some tears or have a moment of connection with someone else, but also public vulnerability in the classrooms, because they talk about difficult issues and they have tough conversations. And I think when students have landed in my office after those tough conversations, they just feel like there wasn't any space to be themselves in that conversation. And so I think moving forward, there's certainly the need for, again, destigmatizing mental health and having more conversations about well-being will allow us to be vulnerable in these spaces and just let it be okay.
Well, I want to go back to self-care, self-schmear.
Sure.
Because I think a lot of people think, oh, self-care, that's like take a bubble bath, right?
Yeah.
Like, or go do a face mask, or maybe have a nap.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of the soft skills that you need to stay well and to keep practicing law at a high level,
Yeah.
how does self-care as we know it kind of fit in?
So really, it's all about the nervous system. We're just walking nervous systems, and we're raw and we're vulnerable, some of us more than others. And self-care is all about learning to calm the nervous system and prepare yourself, whether you call it armoring up or strengthening your resolve for dealing with difficulty. And so I break self-care down into protect strategies, connect strategies, and rest and recharge strategies. And those each kind of meet the nervous system on different levels. So whether it's a fight, flight need or tend and befriend need, or, just some of those core elements of who we are that when they're raw cause us to behave in certain ways, and self-care can just help to protect us. And, coincidentally, hot baths, cold plunges, those can be self-care for some people, as long as we're recognizing that what we're doing is helping to calm our nervous system and help us to rest and recharge, then, that's great. Often it's more than that. And that's why sometimes it gets diminished to go take a hot bath or, but.
And I mean, the idea of cold plunge just sounds like torture still to me.
Absolutely.
I just can't
Not my
do it
thing.
yet. But
Yeah.
I mean, for a long time, we sort of denigrated, oh, that's like women's stuff. Don't worry about that.
Right.
What would you say to the people who sort of brush off the whole self-care idea?
Yeah, well, I would say it's essential to being human. If we want to be able to apply kindness and compassion, first of all, to ourselves, then we need to have some element of self-care in our life where we're reflecting on who we are, where we're connecting to what we need, where we're allowing space for emotions. And when we do that for ourselves, we're open to that coming into the conversation or being part of our connection with other people. And so self-care in my life allows me to be open to support you, not be triggered by what you bring to the table, and just help to manage situations that are difficult. And I think that applies to all humans. When we're not managing our emotions, we're defaulting in that fight, flight, freeze, which is better known as, mad, sad, scared, which is anger, anxiety, depression when it goes on long term. And sometimes those are behaviors that we see when people aren't able to apply self-care and just kind of calm those big emotions.
And bringing Beth back in here, as it applies to practicing law, if we didn't have the self-care part of that equation covered, what happens?
Well, I think, and Judy has commented on this, I think practicing law is quite a stressful business for many people. It's competitive. It involves a lot of hard work, a lot of challenging issues, a lot of confrontations with issues and with other people. And I think that having some capacity to look at yourself and how you function best, I think is really important if you're not going to burn yourself out in very short order in the legal profession. So, Judy, I understand that you teach something called the human curriculum, and that certainly sounds like subject matter which is unusual compared to some of the traditional law program. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you mean by that and how you think it relates to the preparation of lawyers for the legal profession.
So the human curriculum is kind of a word or phrase that I gave to a framework for understanding human-centered practice. And my background is teaching and education, so curriculum just seemed like a natural word for that. But really what it is, it's anchored in this notion of self-care that we're talking about, where we're thinking about the human elements in what we do in work. And sometimes we talk about that in terms of soft skills and hard skills. The hard practical skills for the job we have is the curriculum of the law school or education or whatever discipline we happen to be in. The human curriculum is not the soft skills, it's the harder skills. I think there's hard skills and harder skills. And these are...
So what are the hard skills?
Yeah. So these are things like emotional intelligence, empathy, learning how to be an active, empathic listener, recognizing that being human in practice, first and foremost, I'm the most important person in this work, because if I'm not taking care of myself and showing up for myself, I'm going to struggle to have these skills of compassion and empathy to be open to supporting others. And so the human curriculum starts with a deep dive into the self, my needs. It juxtaposes what we might call trauma-informed lawyering or trauma-informed teaching, in that it's healing-centered work. And so we're healing and supporting our nervous system, connecting to what that is, and using that knowledge when we're in the space with other humans. And those are the soft/harder skills. In terms of it being a curriculum, I teach it in phases. So it has a process of aware is the first step, care, and then cope. And so aware is all of the knowledge, skills, and attitudes and practices that I need to be aware of that, first of all, I can consider implementing into my life for my own well-being. Care is looking at those self-care practices and how they're connected to the nervous system. And there's a big why physiologically behind how they work to support us to be strong. And then cope is actually using that knowledge and those strategies to cope through life. And then the extension of that is cope, manage, grow, heal, repeat, because life just keeps throwing struggle our way. And so we just know that we're in a cycle then of using the skills and repeating the practices to continue to be stronger. And that's how we build resilience through adversity.
It's funny because usually we bring letters and we read them on the podcast at this point, but we actually have a special perspective that I wanted to share with both of you.
Okay.
It's Jody Martin, and she's the Director of Regulation for the Law Society of Saskatchewan.
Wellness issues in the legal profession are a top-down, bottom-up, everyone in the middle reality. For legal practitioners in particular, the ability to deliver competent legal services can undoubtedly be affected by their well-being. Addictions, mental, physical health issues, stress are often ignored or downplayed in the legal profession. As the regulator, we are certainly aware of the significant impact wellness has on the profession. So we've taken proactive steps to try to begin engaging with the membership. We have developed a mentorship program, which will be coming out in 2024. One of the important components of a mentorship program is to have mentors and mentees. So we really want to encourage folks who are listening to engage in that process and really reap the rewards of being one of those actors in that relationship. We also have identified the need to look at our own regulatory framework and see if that is supporting or if there's any sort of barriers to member wellness. So we've got a working group of a cross-section of board members and senior staff taking a look at our regulatory processes. We're going to look at our disciplinary process because it is a challenge within our current framework to address individuals who have complaints or discipline coming through the process, but those complaints and those disciplinary issues are directly the result of mental health or wellness issues. So we want to make sure that we have the best approach possible to help the members in those areas while also continuing to protect the public and serve the public interest. Other ways the Law Society is working towards reducing the stigma associated with mental health issues and considerations and bringing it to the forefront is through the delivery of several continuing professional development programs, recognizing as well that sometimes the commitment for self-care is an impediment to accessing resources and supports in the wellness area. There have been a dozen or so bite-sized continuing professional development sessions and wellness series. They're 15 minutes or less that cover a broad scope of what we refer to as soft skills, such things as resilience, mindfulness, nurturing positive emotions, emotional intelligence. We have recognized that the culture of a law firm has an important role to play in terms of the wellness of the profession generally. So we look to proactively help firms in that respect through a component of what's called the Law Firm Practice Management Assessment Tool. This is a mandatory component of law firm regulation, and it asks firms to self-assess on wellness areas, including whether or not they are attending to the well-being of their lawyers and their staff. The Law Society is certainly aware of the realities and the challenges pertaining to the wellness of the profession, and that the Law Society board and the administration is actively pursuing ways to provide supports to the profession, at the same time evaluating our own processes to ensure that we're not creating barriers as well.
That's Jody Martin. She's the Director of Regulation for the Law Society of Saskatchewan. And she mentioned a number of tools and courses and resources that they have online. We're going to include some links to those in our show notes. But just listening to her, what's going through your minds? At first Judy and then Beth.
Sure. It ties directly to what I teach as part of the human curriculum. She was talking about this notion of coping. And really, when we understand what it means to be human, it means to understand that we behave in ways when we go about the world based on our needs. And when we're not paying attention to our needs and meeting our needs, we default to coping with that. And what I like to say to people is that we're designed as human beings to cope no matter what. We will either cope proactively and positively via self-care, or we'll cope maladaptively by defaulting to things like addictions, substance use, avoidance, or active coping that is just harmful in some manner. So I just think about the importance of teaching some of the basic understanding around what it means to be human and how we're designed in a way to adapt to our environment. And we can get ahead of difficulty, cope positively, so we're not defaulting to some of those maladaptive strategies that can get us into trouble.
And I'm thinking about maladaptive strategies as it applies to law and like a number of other professions. Like you think about the idea of let's just go for drinks. Let's just go and like take some steam off. And would that be like, how maladaptive is that? Because I mean, it's fairly common.
Yeah. And part of it is adaptive, because when we think about self-care, connect activities, as I talked about, protect, connect, recharge, and rest are kind of the three areas that I look at self-care. But connecting with others, laughing, singing, dancing, drinking, eating, all of those things we love to do together in moderation, in healthy connection, are adaptive. It's when we pull away and we're only relying on that one thing, or we're doing it in isolation, out of connection with others, and it's masking what we really need for true protection and self-care. And so we want our self-care strategies to be diversified, to to involve a lot of different things, and we don't want to be relying heavily on one thing, especially if it has the potential to be unhealthy or unhelpful.
Yeah, like the whole addictions piece is like, we could do another episode on that.
Yes.
But Beth, as you were listening to Jody, what struck you?
Well, over my contact with the Law Society of Saskatchewan, which goes back quite a long way now, I think one of the clues the Law Society often has about the struggles that lawyers are having comes through complaints that are made by their clients or other members of the public about their conduct and the way they've handled their files, the way they behave in a courtroom, whatever it is that is the subject of the complaint. And in my experience with the discipline process in the Law Society, a lot of those cases are people who are clearly having a hard time. They're having mental health struggles, and that's reflected perhaps, as Judy says, in addictions or in some kind of anxiety or depression that leads them to take shortcuts or do things that they probably otherwise wouldn't do and that they're probably aware are not really appropriate. And I think have really been encouraged by the way that the Law Society has taken up this issue and has decided that they will institute some initiatives that sort of depart from the traditional picture of a lawyer as someone who's invulnerable and is on top of everything all the time. And they will recognize that lawyers are human beings and that the conditions that they face often are challenging and that takes a toll on their mental health. So I'm really pleased that the Law Society is introducing a number of these initiatives to try and address what has clearly been a need, well, probably forever, but certainly for a long time.
Yeah, it sort of makes you think, like, who is in charge of my mental wellness if I'm a lawyer? Well, it's me primarily, but if I'm not reaching out and getting help, that it does raise a whole host of things that present as disciplinary issues or, okay, here's a complaint coming in from a client.
And I think historically, I think lawyers were reluctant to seek help because it did seem inconsistent with that picture they wanted to present of somebody who's really competent and professional and knows what they're doing every hour of every day. I think that has been one of the things that has held them back from getting help for the struggles that they're having.
That whole stigma, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You've said, Judy, that law is a caregiving profession. I think a lot of students do come to law school with the idea that they want to advance social justice and provide professional services to vulnerable people. But I think there are also a lot of students who have come with some vision of the legal profession which doesn't have a lot to do with providing care to other human beings. I wonder what you think the value is of defining law as a caregiving profession.
Well, I see a lot of connections between the legal profession and what we call helping and caregiving professions.
Would that be like teaching, nursing?
Teaching, nursing, parenting even.
Yeah, typically feminine professions.
Yeah. Any profession that holds humans at the heart of the work. And I think that speaks to the legal profession, even behind maybe some of the cases that you might take on where you don't necessarily see the humans at the forefront of the work. They might be at the heart of what you're representing or you're attempting to protect or support. In caregiving professions, there are kind of 3 or 4 defining aspects of it, and it boils down to, these are professions where people are responsible for the needs of others, where we need to be kind and supportive through the suck, through difficulty, where we need to be compassionate about what could potentially be a difficult future, like a difficult time ahead, preparing for that difficulty, and protect confidences. And so I see all of those as equating back to the legal profession. And I think it's about framing this work as caregiving work that can support those who, A, come to the discipline looking to help and support others, but also develop understanding and competency for those who don't see a connection.
Just remember that people really do come first. They're at the heart of why the law is even there.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a really important discussion, and it's a discussion that I think has been difficult for the legal profession to come to. I think over the last 10 years or so, there have been a number of very brave lawyers and judges who have come forward and tried to point to this as a phenomenon that is widespread in the legal profession, that is, struggles with mental health, and have really suggested that the legal profession needs to get over stigmatizing people who are struggling with mental health and provide them with support. And I think that this discussion really is critical in the legal profession.
I love the attention you're drawing to it, Judy. And thank you so much for coming on and being part of our letters segment today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm super blessed to have been invited here, and it's great to be part of this amazing project. I love what you're doing as well.
Today, we were joined by Judy Johnson-Sfernick. She's the Wellbeing Coordinator at the College of Law here at the University of Saskatchewan. And Beth, we'll see each other next time, right?
Right.
All right.
Counting on it.
That's it for this episode of Dear Beth. We record and produce this podcast on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations. It's also the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to our First Nations and Métis ancestors, and we are grateful to be able to have these conversations and to be able to hear these stories on Treaty 6 territory. We do this while we're recognizing our own privilege, and we're mindful of how we can use this podcast to make sure diverse voices get a platform. We draw inspiration from Maria Campbell's observation that stories are a way that we can talk to each other without having barriers between us. Our team at Dear Beth is Leah Howie, Bree Lowenberger, and Beth Bilson. Hannah Jorgensen's our associate producer, and Wayne Giesbrecht is our tech. We produce this podcast in partnership with the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. Dear Beth is a production of Cascade Communications. I'm Jen Cannell. Thanks for listening.